Different, Chapter 2. He said, "That's not a problem, sir, but you'll have to remove them." I said, trying to sound humble, "I'm not from around here. Where is the nearest private airport?" He looked at me as if I had just asked the world's stupidest question and said, "Are you telling me you don't know there's a war going on? We're not in the recreational flying business anymore. We need all the fuel we can get for our fighters and bombers. Damn. What am I supposed to do now?" Then he added, puzzled, "What is this anyway?" I said, "It's a Piper Cherokee 180. He said incredulously, "The only thing Piper makes is Cub, and this looks like an ME 108. The Germans use them to transport VIPs. A light bulb went off in my head, just like the coyote in the cartoon. I heard the Me 108 comparison from the people at Cape Canaveral, and it gave me a brilliant idea. I said conspiratorially, "It's experimental. We developed it based on a captured Me 108. Shit. Me and my big mouth. I already knew what his next question would be. He said, "Who are we?" Thinking quickly, I nonchalantly replied, "OSS. I work directly for Wild Bill." It was the only World War II secret agency I could recall. In my dimension, the OSS had become the CIA by 1947, and Wild Bill Donovan had been put out to pasture for bad behavior. But who knows here? The captain nodded sagely at me and said, "So it's classified." I wasn't about to correct him. I said, "Yes, that's right. We are trying this new model to see if we can use it for the same purposes as the Nazis." The guy said hopefully, "So you're ferrying people?" I was burying myself deeper and deeper into the hole, but I wanted to appear compliant, and I couldn't think of any other way out. So I said lightly, "Sure, but I'm taking a break between assignments." And then hopefully added, "Can I leave it here until I find another cab?" He said admiringly, "Well, I can give you a job right now. Who do I call to set it up?" Damn. Now that would be a serious problem if someone in authority answered the phone. I said with excessive eagerness, "I don't need permission if you give me fuel. We have to keep our activities in the shadows." I winked at him, saying, "You know, just between us insiders." He threw me a sly look and said, "No problem, buddy. When can you leave?" I said, "As soon as I get some basic stuff. Maybe in 2 hours?" He said admiringly, "The general and his wife will be waiting for you right here on the point." That's how I got into the air cab business. If the bureaucracy needs you, it will use you. It's too big to give a damn about reasons. So there's always room for a smart young man who can make money in the nooks and crannies. I had a luxury jet, and the army needed transportation. So who would look a metaphorical gift horse in the mouth? At least it got rid of the sheriff. I had a good reason to disappear. Sooner or later, one of the locals would figure out that I wasn't from this dimension, and that discovery might lead to me being dissected in a shadow lab, right next to the aliens. So I locked up the house and grabbed 2 suitcases, one with all my clothes and travel stuff, and the other stuffed with cash. Then I took a cab back to the airport, ready to find the love of my life. The general was an arrogant asshole, and his wife was a cranky old fogey who complained about the intense vibration all the way to Washington. The flight would have been much less turbulent if we hadn't had to fly over land all the way to Washington. But there were supposedly German aircraft carriers in the Atlantic, the very ones they had captured from the British. So it made sense to stay inland. Including refueling, the 1,000-mile journey dragged on until late afternoon, even at 130 knots. Finally, I flew over the capital at night. Because of the war, it was pitch black there. But I followed the moonlit path, sparkling on the Potomac, to Washington National, if you're wondering about the name. Ronald Reagan was still making movies then. During the trip from Lauderdale, the general made the unilateral decision to hire me as his personal chauffeur. I didn't blame him. The interior of the Piper was very soft compared to the cockpits of all other airplanes of that era, which was fortunate for me. I now had the basis for a new identity. Washington was not the self-indulgent place it had been in my day. We were at war. So the pork spending that characterized this den of iniquity was confined strictly to the military. This in turn reduced the vain self-indulgence that gave us the marble buildings that crowded the Federal Triangle and Constitution Avenue in my dimension. It also greatly improved the appearance of the place. Of course, there was no subway, and I had to get around the city somehow. So I bought an unassuming but very reliable '57 Chevy and rented a small apartment in Alexandria, not far from DCA. I could have lived much more luxuriously, as I still had a suitcase full of money, but I wanted to keep a low profile. Then I entered the general's service, providing transportation for all the important people he wished to bestow his generosity upon. By the standards of my dimension, I was paid a small fortune, but it was cheaper here, and I had access to all the fuel I needed. The flights themselves were not complicated. Every week or so, I would transport some VIP from one place to another, usually on army business. I even started bringing extra stuff like snacks and booze to keep my fat cat guests happy. Meanwhile, I scoured every source in DC, looking for any mention of Kat. I realized that I was in the perfect position to achieve my true goal of reuniting with my beloved wife. I visited the Census Bureau and reviewed their records. Kat was alive in 1960. Thus, I knew she existed. That was a relief. No new census had been taken since then, so her current whereabouts were unknown. According to the latest information, she was living in Manhattan. I tried the Social Security Administration in Baltimore, but that turned out to be a laughable endeavor, even for me. For some reason, the people there were not inclined to share my ex-wife's personal information with me. They even mentioned stalking charges if I contacted them again. But, of course, fate really likes to mock me. Hell, maybe it happens to all of us. Anyway, I was about to resign myself to loneliness and despair when that fickle bitch waved her magic wand and changed everything, drastically. All summer I had been transporting eggheads from LaGuardia to a strip in the wilds of East Tennessee. I didn't know who these people were, or, more importantly, why they were dropped off in this hollow part of the Appalachians, but it was clear they were not military. If I had to guess, I'd say they were scientists or some other kind of super-intelligent nerds. Nevertheless, it was clearly a covert government operation, because the guy who made the flight schedules warned me not to talk to the passengers, and I was told to forget everything I overheard. I was supposed to pick people up in New York and drop them off in Knoxville, no questions asked. On that fateful morning, I took an hour-long flight to a small strip in Princeton, New Jersey. It was a routine flight, but it was clear that I had a very important person to pick up. I even had an Army PR man in the right seat, placed there to smooth the way for my mystery person. The curator's name was Todd, and he reminded me of my former roommate with the same name. He was very good-looking, in a clean uniform adorned with the kind of ribbons that the Army awards for excellent paper shuffling. Think Tom Cruise in A Few Good Men. And he was also a first-rate sodomizer. So I had to listen to endless tales of conquering women to the point where I considered opening the passenger side door and making a radical right turn. We pulled up to the building that served as the terminal in this backwater field. I kept the propeller spinning while Todd came out to greet the frail, white-haired gentleman who was our main passenger. All in all, it was business as usual, except that there was a second passenger with the old man. It was a petite woman, but both Todd and I were the center of her attention. Todd because she was incredibly beautiful, and me because she was my long-lost wife. The fact that I didn't pass out from the shock was a credit to my physical fitness. But still, my vision was shaken, and I felt a strong metallic taste from the adrenaline that had just entered my bloodstream. I missed Kat very much. I mourned her for 6 long years. I dedicated my life to finding her, and now she was walking nonchalantly toward my airplane. Of course, I knew she was dead, and I was dead in her world, so you can imagine how rotten the situation was. Kat and the old man were helped into the cabin by their friendly overseer. Todd, a slut like himself, stared mesmerized at Kat's beautiful round ass as he helped her in. I had the good sense to turn my head and stare intently at the left side of the airplane. I didn't want my wife to see who was flying the plane, at least not until I got a grip on myself. Todd was especially thoughtful of Kat. Gee, I wonder why. On the other hand, I was at a loss for words, which was unremarkable, considering I wasn't supposed to be talking to passengers. Stepping aboard, Kat threw me no more than a casual glance. There was a pilot's seat between us, and I was wearing a baseball cap and mirrored aviator sunglasses. More importantly, I was dead. I chatted with ATC as usual, started the engine, and we took off in the air toward Tennessee. It turned out that the second passenger was Albert Einstein. I knew about Einstein from my dimension, so I didn't need to be introduced. That meant that the place I was taking all these eggheads to was the Manhattan Project facilities at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. While we were in the air, two things were happening simultaneously. The horned man in the right seat was bombarding the passenger in the left rear seat, that is, my wife, with ingratiating charms. It was such a blatant attempt at seduction that it made everyone but Todd uncomfortable. She, for her part, ignored him, talking exclusively to Einstein. Kat was clearly one of the great man's acolytes, which made sense given her aptitude in physics, at least in my dimension. I wasn't paying attention to the absurdly self-serving conversation Todd was trying to make, but I was listening intently to the discussion going on in the back seats, for she was explaining what had happened to me. The two of them were discussing Einstein's theory of the origin of the universe. What I took from their conversation was that the concept of a single reality is overrated. According to Einstein, the universe consists of an infinite number of parallel universe bubbles that were created simultaneously as a result of a single event called the Big Bang. The result of this was similar to the phenomenon that results when you place two mirrors so that their reflections go to infinity. I mean, you get an infinite duplication of the same thing. Thus, in every reality, there are an infinite number of possible outcomes, all dictated by context and choice. Can I hear you saying, "What the fuck are you talking about?" Well, for example, in your universe, you turned left and walked into a bar. And in another reality, you turned right and got hit by a bus. Same situation, two different choices, two different outcomes, both valid. And it all happened to you. In my universe, Kat was in the wrong place at the wrong time. But the Kat who lived in this dimension was not. It was the same for me. If I hadn't decided to fly towards the Sargasso Sea, I wouldn't be where I am now. In my case, it was fortunate because I ended up in a dimension where my beloved wife was still alive. As you can no doubt guess, I was experiencing a storm of emotions. Yet I knew I had to keep those feelings in check. There were too many unknowns. Any one of them could be fatal. So I successfully suppressed the urge to do something stupid. I could have opened up right away. Maybe I should have. But really? Really? The Kat in this world knew I was dead, and I had no idea what she'd do if I turned around and said, "Ta-da! I'm back!" I bet it wouldn't be something I wanted to experience. From what the sheriff told me, we had been living apart for some time, but why? Maybe the answer to that question will help me find a way in. At any rate, the shock of my sudden appearance would probably kill her. So, I needed more information. That's why the role of an anonymous pilot suited the circumstances just fine. In this dimension, Knoxville McGee Tyson was mostly military. I landed on runway 234 right and took the parallel runway to the terminal. There were 3 C-119 airplanes lined up on the parallel runway like it was rush hour. It looked like it was a busy place. A guard of honor came out to meet and see Einstein off. They respectfully seated the great man and his acolyte in the waiting service car. The Strangler jumped into the front seat and they drove off. I stayed behind after the flight in the Piper and pondered how I could make the 25 miles to the Oak Ridge facility before this asshole could settle the score with my wife. On all my other trips, I had parked the Cherokee in one of the hangars. So I asked the PFC, who was helping me roll the car, if he knew anyone who wanted to sell an old car. The guy was in the Tennessee National Guard, so he had to know the local scene. The dude stood there scratching his ass, contemplating. Or maybe his ass was just itchy. Anyway, after a long hesitation, he said, "I don't know about the car, but Charlie over there has an Indian Scout he's trying to sell. It'll probably cost you $40. It was beautiful. In those days, the Scout motorcycle was over 30 years old, but it was still one of the best motorcycles out there. This motorcycle looked like it was military because it was olive-colored and still had the big spotlight between the handlebars. But these motorcycles were maneuverable and fast, and they could run forever with almost no maintenance. That's why they were used by the military. I pulled 2 20s out of a stash in my backpack, and within an hour I was on my way, carrying a cloud of blue smoke behind me. The guy I bought it from even put me a leather flight helmet and goggles. Between Knoxville and Oak Ridge is about 25 miles, The terrain is green and mountainous, so the drive down Tennessee Highway 62 was scenic. Except without the rain, I could have done without the rain. I got to Oak Ridge around lunchtime. The town itself is in a long and deep valley with ridges, which is why it got its name. The idea was that the ridges would contain any accidental detonations in case someone messed up. Actually, these divided valleys were one of the main reasons Oak Ridge was chosen. The city itself was top secret. The federal government created it from scratch in just over 2 years. In that time, the place went from deeply rural to 75,000 residents, making Oak Ridge the 5th largest city in Tennessee. But of course, you won't be able to find it on a map. And that's because it was dedicated to one thing only: the creation of the atomic bomb. Everything around me was lit up like a carnival as I climbed the crest of the last valley. The Manhattan Project was well documented in my dimension. Therefore, I knew more about it than any normal person living in this dimension. For example, that there was to be nothing but a few rednecks in this valley. That was also the reason why the clearance problems had to be sorted out first. Fortunately, I had the answer. The administration building was called Castle on the Hill. It was located on the ridge on the east side, facing the ridge where I was sitting. On paper, it was the Clinton Engineering Works, but in reality, it was the name of the engineering district of Manhattan. It was the place I had to go for help. I felt like just showing up at the guardhouse and asking permission to talk to my old buddy Les Groves. I had transported the general on a number of occasions. He especially liked the Tennessee whiskey I took with me on my trips, and he was in charge of the whole project. When I approached them, the MPs were skeptical, but I insisted. They called the building where Groves's office was located, and after a couple of minutes, an employee came out of there. He was wearing a silver oak leaf. He must have been close to the general. He said in a friendly manner, "The general told me there wasn't enough whiskey to make him go out in this rain. That's why he sent me." I laughed politely and said, "I'm a ferry pilot, and I'm stuck here for a couple days. Could you help me out, find a place to shelter me?" The guy gestured to the hill behind us and said, "We already know who you are, and the general has authorized you to stay in the guest house for the rest of the week." That, my friends, is how a dead man became a temporary resident of the defunct town of Oak Ridge, Tennessee. The guest house was used to house dignitaries. It was a stone's throw from Jackson Square, which was the center of town in this top-secret location. And the fact that I had a bed there was a modest testament to how far in this world you could go for fine whiskey. I planned to reunite with my wife as soon as I could find her, so I started looking for Kat as soon as I dropped my backpack. A couple 100 yards down the hill, there was a big dance going on at the tennis courts, and Kat loves to dance, so I was sure I'd find her there. I was coming down the hill, dressed in my best attire, a black silk shirt and the same white linen pants. I was a man of contrasts, more so than is obvious. The rain had stopped, and a crescent moon hung over the beautiful Tennessee evening. The music wafted to me as I made my way to the place where the dance was being held. It was a cleared tennis court with a real band playing Glenn Miller and Tommy Dorsey tunes. I stood in the dark on the backstretch and looked for Kat among the dancers. The band was playing Moonlight Serenade, one of the most romantic songs of the 40s era. I got about halfway through the hall when I stopped and just stared. My wife was swaying in the arms of my asshole former passenger. Damn! He'd made a lot of progress in the 6 hours since I'd last seen them. That asshole was relentlessly harassing Kat, so I guess I expected to see what I saw. But still, the lightning bolt of jealousy almost made my knees buckle. I know it's not fair to call it a betrayal. I mean, I was dead for God's sake. And Kat is a gorgeous and sensual woman, so she had every right to be seduced by any man she chose, but really? Todd? Seriously? They danced, swaying, closer and closer, until she pressed herself against him, resting her head on his chest, her fingers interlocked, and her eyes dreamily closed. They were in a world of their own as the music played. Just you and me, summer sky, heavenly breeze, a kiss among the trees. It was too much. I ran into the road and threw up right in the middle of these metaphorical trees. Unfortunately, Todd had also moved into the guest house, so I had to put up with him at breakfast. He looked alert and good-looking. As soon as he saw me, he came over, brimming with a sense of camaraderie, pulled out a chair and sat down, grinning like an idiot. I tried to ignore him. The first words out of his mouth were, "Well, I nailed that girl last night." I knew it was coming and I was ready for it. However, that straightforward statement of conquest almost made me die in 2 universes. "Calm down, boy," I raised an eyebrow and said, trying to hide how much I was shaken by this asshole's success with my wife. "And I should care. Why?" He said, "She was one of the most beautiful minxes I've ever had the pleasure of associating with. But the weird thing is, once she got involved, she started calling me Eric." Asswipe smirked mockingly and added, "I'd be offended if she was anyone else." That little insight was bouncing around in my skull like a .22 caliber bullet, when he laughed like it was the most incredible thing in the world and exclaimed, "Hey, isn't that your name? Man, what a coincidence." I thought, "Asshole." He then added, "But as soon as we finished, she threw a tantrum. I had planned to spend the whole night with her, but she wouldn't stop crying. It was like she felt guilty for getting involved with this Eric guy." I saw it hit him. "You don't think she's married, do you? I haven't seen the ring. But some ladies hide it to get the full Todd Blankenship experience." He puffed up like a fucking peacock. I said with annoyance, "How should I know? I'm just a cab driver, and I only met the woman yesterday. How would you react?" That man drove a stake through my heart, and in doing so, Kat was obviously still mourning my death, as I was mourning hers. So a little voice in my head screamed, "She still loves me." Dickhead paused and muttered puzzledly, "Man, I gotta tell you, that little lady is just nuts. She's probably the prettiest one in the whole complex, maybe the whole state of Tennessee, but she's all yours. I'm done with her." I thought, what a condescending asshole.
Let me assure you, friends, I'm not as weak as they make me out to be in this situation. It's just that interdimensional travel is disorienting. Ha! I bet no one else has ever said that. There are too many ways to stumble, and it makes you doubt. Nevertheless, listening to this jerk brag about touching my wife, or whatever you call someone who was an intimate part of your soul, but whom you've never met, I finally started to clean up my act. I had been playing Hamlet for far too long. Now I was determined to stop acting like a world-class pussy and just get down to business. I asked with heat in my voice, "Where is she staying?" He raised one eyebrow and looked at me skeptically. Then he laughed. "Really? You wouldn't stand a chance with a woman like her?" I said through clenched teeth, "I appreciate your advice. Now where the hell does she live?" He got the message. This asshole was 7 inches shorter than me and 50 pounds lighter. And he could see in my eyes that he was about to be sewn into a burlap sack and dropped from 10,000 feet. He said soothingly, "Take it easy, kid. If you want to get shot by that hot little girl, you'll then feel free. She lives in her own prefab house near Y12. She's doing some top-secret monkey business there." The historians in my dimension had exhaustively described what happened at Oak Ridge, so I knew all about Y12. It was an electromagnetic separation plant that produced the enriched uranium used in the 2 bombs we dropped on Japan. It was a couple miles down the valley. As I drove my trusty Scout to the Y12 location, I was trying to think of the best way to approach Kat. It was an absolutely gorgeous sunny day in East Tennessee. You could see why the people who live there consider it God's country. The problem was how to introduce himself to his wife, at least not without scaring her completely. People don't come back from the dead. I could think of only one such case, and I wasn't about to start a new religion. So I couldn't just knock on Kat's door and ask her out. The Scout kickstand was broken. I was just leaning my bike against a tree when Kat solved my problem. She appeared, pacing aimlessly down Scarborough Road, heading toward a small green hill across from a large, blocky Y12 building.
I restrained my fervor from rushing into the woods right behind her. Instead, I followed her stealthily down a parallel path. She was wearing a pale yellow sundress that stood out among all the greenery. It made her easier to track. As Kat came to a small rocky ledge at the top of the hill, a mockingbird sang in the trees. She sat down, tucking her legs gracefully under her, and just stared out at the green Tennessee countryside. It was quiet and peaceful, and she had clearly come here to think. It was a touching scene. I knew exactly what she was feeling and why, for I had been doing exactly the same thing sitting on my little bench next to her grave. Now my long-lost wife was right in front of me, gorgeous and alive, and I was 15 feet away from her, standing behind a big old oak tree. My heart raced when I said softly, "Please don't turn around." Sure enough, she gave a startled sigh and turned around. The gods had deducted style points from my scorecard. The cat couldn't see me from behind the tree, so I said, keeping my voice low and loving, "I'm sorry I scared you, and I promise I won't hurt you." Then I added fervently, with all the love in my heart, "But I must remain secret while I tell you something." I hoped she would recognize my voice. Kat jumped to her feet, clearly frightened, but she also looked intrigued. I said soothingly, "Now, I'm going to come out from behind the tree, and I want you to have as much time as you need to digest everything. But I can assure you that what you see is real and that I love you." She said in a trembling voice, "Who are you? Don't touch me." I said, "I would never hurt you. I love you from the moment we met at the fraternity mixer years ago," and walked out from behind the tree. For a second she just stared at him in amazement, eyes wide with fear. Then those beautiful blue eyes slowly rolled back into her head, and she lost consciousness. She came to, lying on the ground with her head in my lap and me stroking her forehead. Her intelligent blue eyes opened, and she saw my face and sobbed with recognition. I said, "It's me, Peaks." My wife really was a gorgeous little pixie, and that was my special name for her. I was the only one who used it. It was my way of telling her it was really me. Kat may have been small and compact, but she wasn't fragile at all. Her powerful mind took control of the situation, and she asked in surprise, "Is it really you, Eric?" I nodded. She jumped up, threw her arms around my neck, buried her face in my chest, and burst into tears. After that, there was a period where the two of us just hugged and cried. "Tell me, what would you do?" It was very painful for me to realize that I would never see her again. And she went through the same thing. The emotions had to go somewhere. Now we were hugging as if that was the only reason we hadn't flown off the face of the planet. She asked through her tears, "How are you here? It's an incredible story, and we need time to tell it. But let's just say that the two of us had to defeat death to be reunited." She sniffled for a long time. Then she threw her head back and asked, "What do you mean, death? How are you alive anyway? I was told you died in a boating accident. It was so bad that the coffin was closed. I was at your funeral." I said, "You'll have to disbelieve me a lot when you hear this story, and I'm not quite sure how it happened myself. Isn't there some private place where we can talk it over together?" Housing in Oak Ridge ranged from shacks that housed African American laborers, yes, segregation was still alive and well in this dimension, to neat houses for scholars like Kat. My wife's house was within walking distance of the Y-12 facility, with its busy Calitron racetracks, where the ingredients for nuclear holocaust were pumped out. It was all set in a bucolic setting of dusty roads, green fields, and mountain ranges. You almost expected people to sit on porches and play banjos. Kat's house was one of those prefabricated buildings that grew like mushrooms in a damp cave. The whole neighborhood was somehow alien and hostile. Small houses surrounded a massive square building, drowning in a sea of fences and barriers. We didn't say a word as we walked side by side down the slope. It reminded me of our first walk in another time and another dimension. Kat's 20 by 24 plywood cabin had one bedroom. It was scrupulously neat and tidy, like Kat herself. The house had a combined living and dining room and kitchen. A bathroom completed the square. There were 2 armchairs and a reading lamp in the living room. Kat gestured to one chair and asked, "Coffee?" I decided that my wife needed time to think things over, so I said, "Sure." Kat fiddled around in the kitchen for a few minutes while I watched her, just assessing her. This version was not the wife and mother she was in my dimension. This woman was a seasoned professional. Nevertheless, in her early 30s, she had become even more beautiful. Her body had become fuller, and her hair had grown back to a sheaf of wheat that looked like a glistening golden mane. It had been almost 8 long, terrible years since I had last seen her, and the certainty that I would never see her again was a torment. As far as I could tell, it had only been about 3 years since I had died in this dimension, but still, I could tell that Kat's pain was no less intense. To keep the conversation going, I asked, "How did you end up working for Einstein?" She turned around, surprised and concerned, and said,
How do you know who he is? The government keeps him a secret. It must be a top secret assignment. I said, I know a lot of things. For example, I know that this is the Manhattan Project. It involves creating the ingredients for the atomic bombs that will end the war, and that Einstein, who is already famous for his theory of relativity, is part of the brain trust along with Oppenheimer and Szilard. Kat nearly dropped the coffee pot. She said, genuinely upset, How do you know all this? What are you, a German spy? I laughed and said, I am not a German spy, and the reason I know all these things is part of the explanation for how I ended up here. Kat brought 2 steaming mugs into the living room, handed me hers, and sat in the other chair, looking both loving and concerned. I marveled for a moment at the contrasts of my wife, beautiful, modest, energetic, loving, brilliant, and currently very anxious. I started like this. When you and Einstein were flying in the airplane, she interrupted me as if I had just confirmed my impression. You were the pilot. I had a strange feeling that you were with me, but my mind told me it was ridiculous because you were dead. I said, Well, yes and no. Remember the part about parallel universes that you discussed with Einstein? She eagerly replied, Yes, it is the most recent theory of cosmology. Einstein and de Sitter predicted this phenomenon based on the revised theory of relativity. I worked with both of them on the density expansion equations and the Hubble constant. I said affectionately, Everything you just said. Then cautiously added, gauging her reaction, I am living proof that Einstein is right. I could see that this embarrassed her. She asked, puzzled, What do you mean right? Okay, this was the moment to roll the dice. I muttered a little prayer and said, He's right about parallel universes, because I'm not from this one. A look of utter incomprehension appeared on her pretty face. I said, I might as well spit this out. I don't know about any density extension equations, but I'm telling you that I'm really as dead in this universe as you think I am. What's more, I'm absolutely certain that you and our little daughter are also dead in the place I came from. Kat continued to remain utterly bewildered. Okay, now it's all in. I took a deep breath and said, We met and married in college and had a very loving life together. It was a perfect existence until you and our daughter were killed in a traffic accident. It was one of those things. Something you experience but can't change. I never stopped grieving. Kat began to think that I had succeeded in getting through to her. She said softly, The same thing happened to me when you were killed. I've been crying ever since your funeral. I nodded sympathetically, then added, I was sure I'd never see you again. I accepted that as a fact, no matter how much it hurt me. I tried to fight for life, tried to make something of my life, and succeeded in my career. And yet losing you was a black hole in the center of my soul, eating away at it from the inside out. She said with tears in her eyes, I felt exactly the same way. I'm one of Einstein's research assistants, but there is no love in my life. I'm just trying to cope as best I can. I nodded sympathetically at her. In that respect, we were fellow travelers. I said, And then, on a very ordinary day, as I was flying between the Bahamas and Fort Lauderdale, I came upon something strange. When I came out the other side, I was in a world where I was dead, and you were alive, and apparently our daughter was never born. Kat sighed. Her mournful look said it all. She muttered sadly, Things must have been different in your dimension. We tried. God knows we tried. That was one of the reasons I thought separation was justified. I replied irritably, We'll get to the non-essentials in a minute. The main thing you need to know is that in my dimension, the war that is still going on here ended in 1945. She looked stunned. She asked, How? I said, Simple enough. Roosevelt was the president, not Lindbergh, and he understood the geopolitical situation. The rest, so to speak, is history. Then I added carefully, But what you're doing in this place put an end to that. At least it did in my dimension. Apparently, history in these dimensions differs in the variables that lead to different outcomes. She said seriously, Naturally, logically, the inhabitants are the same in every dimension, but what happens to them is the sum of the decisions they themselves and others make. So, in my reality, Germany is in Canada, and we are preparing a solution to that problem. I thought fondly, The eternal nerd.
I said, "So, my being around you is a happy paradox. We are both dead in each other's worlds, but here we are together, and frankly, I don't intend to lose you again under any circumstances." Then I paused and added meaningfully, "Or at least this time I'm going with you." A look of horror appeared on Kat's refined face. She said frustratedly, "You can't. It's too dangerous." I had no idea what she was talking about. I said firmly, "I have no happiness without you. Therefore, if you die, I will die with you." She excitedly replied, "I'm the one they chose, and I'm the one who agreed to it. But this is a one-way trip. I'm not going to have you killed along with me. Moreover, I don't even know how you found out about it. Did it really happen in your dimension as well?" We were obviously talking about two different things. I was telling her I couldn't live without her. She thought I was volunteering to go on some suicide mission with her. I said, Wait. What are you talking about? Are you saying you're getting ready to do something potentially lethal?" My wife was as emotional as I've ever seen her. Kat's usually a cold customer. That's what happens to women with her type of intelligence. But she was completely upset. Maybe that's why she just blurted out, "The Nazis have nuclear capability, and they're going to use it. I'm the one who was chosen to stop them." I was sure she shouldn't have said that to me. I just stood there with my mouth open. Fuck. I knew Kat was a patriot, because rich and very beautiful college girls don't usually spend their free time with ROTC nerds. But what was that? I said, "Explain it to me. The Nazis have the bomb, and you volunteered for some one-sided mission to destroy it?" Her face was grim as she uttered, "Werner Heisenberg. Shit, I knew this guy. He was the Nazi version of Oppenheimer, the father of our A-bomb. Heisenberg did have the upper hand in 1939, but he never got the support he needed to even come close to building a bomb in my world. Must be one of those variations based on choice." Kat went on to say, "Manufactured 4 bombs at the Lac-Coq facility on René-Levasseur Island, behind the Saguenay line." I looked puzzled, and she added by way of explanation, "This is the line of fortifications in Quebec, where Omar Bradley has been holding the Germans for the last couple years. We can't let the Nazis use one of those against our defenses. We have 500,000 men in those lines. It would destroy everything." I said, "Oh my God, the Manhattan Project only developed 2 bombs, and they ended World War II in a couple weeks. I can't imagine making 4. Kat looked at him intently. "Right. But nuclear devices are triggered by a complex fission reaction, which I'm an expert in. So I'm going to infiltrate their facility and make sure the U-235 triggers and the equipment used to make them are destroyed. This will set the Nazis back enough that we'll have our own nuclear capability before they recover." She looked at him with satisfaction and said, "Then the shoe will be on the other foot." I said with skepticism in my voice, "And how are you going to get there? Are they going to drop you off at this place like the airborne units did during the Normandy invasion?" She had a puzzled look on her face, and I thought, "Oops, wrong universe." She replied, "I don't see what Normandy has to do with it. It's in France, not Quebec. But the Germans have air superiority with their jet fighters, so an amphibious invasion is out of the question. Our crew will be taken by submarine to Sept Isles and make their way north to René-Levasseur." I said, "And you must have a map with the whole route laid out on it." Of course she did. If my wife is anything to go by, she is well organized. I like to fish and hunt, and I've been known to fly over the area, at least in my dimension. I knew it was going to be a 120-mile hike through off-road terrain with nothing but wooded hills, lakes, and rivers. Great terrain if you're bear hunting, but challenging and grueling if you're on a mission to blow up Nazi equipment. It was almost 300 miles from the German lines, which were located on the Saguenay River, so there would likely be no military presence there. But there were so many rivers and swamps between the landing site at Sept Isles and René-Levasseur that it would be nearly impossible to get there, even if Kat and her friends hadn't dragged a bunch of explosives with them. I figured these guys wouldn't even make it to their target, let alone successfully infiltrate a high-security compound full of SS guards. I asked with disdain in my voice, "Who came up with this stupid plan?" She replied, surprised that I was so negative, "That was our own OSS. In fact, the reason I am here at Oak Ridge has nothing to do with the Manhattan Project.
I'm only here to get the detailed specifications for the fission triggers. I warily asked, "So you don't work for Einstein?" She replied enthusiastically, "Of course I know. That's exactly why you and I broke up." Then she realized I was the wrong husband and added softly, "You couldn't accept the fact that I would be studying at Princeton and you would be tied to the construction firm in Miami that you inherited when your father died. It couldn't be forever, so I didn't think you'd take it so hard." Kat brightened and added, "For a theoretical physicist like me, this was the opportunity of a lifetime." We veered off topic, but I had to ask, "I know we were separated when I was killed in this dimension. What happened?" She made a sad look and said affectionately, "As I said, I was offered a job at the Institute for Advanced Study. Einstein liked my work on special relativity. Of course, that meant I had to live in Princeton. I hoped that you would realize that our separation was temporary and that there was nothing tying us together, like the baby we had in your dimension." We argued. But in the end, you seemed to accept it. However, you started drinking right after I left, and it eventually led to your death. She burst into tears. "I'm so sorry." Okay, that explained it. Because of the size difference, I was tied up with construction in Miami instead of practicing engineering in Michigan. Kat saw the separation as an opportunity to advance her career, and I saw it as a betrayal. Perhaps I thought I had lost her. She said sincerely, "I was absolutely faithful to you all the time we were apart. I heard that you weren't, but I forgave you because I loved you." Kat was a beautiful and sensual woman. If what she had just said was true, and I had no reason to doubt it, then her loyalty had to be a real sacrifice. I could have berated her for last night's episode, but I wasn't that juvenile. I mean, she was a grieving widow until today, and you'd have to be a complete moron to expect her to be faithful to a dead man. Therefore, this particular conversation was moot. Besides, now we're way off course. I thought, is she trying to distract me on purpose? But the fact remained that Kat was about to do something that would get her killed. I said, "I know the OSS. In my dimension, we call it the CIA. Who do you report to?" She replied seriously, "No reporting. We are isolated from each other to maintain the secrecy of our mission." She added by way of further explanation, "Since we left Washington, we are completely on our own." Kat slyly added, "Everyone thinks I'm helping Einstein, but I'm actually part of a 3-man team. The other 2 have been fighting the Germans since the invasion of Newfoundland. They're the oddest couple. She's a French aristocrat, and he looks like a gorilla. It's kind of like Beauty and the Beast." I asked, still angry. "Did they come up with this crazy scheme?" Kat furrowed her brow and replied, "No, the planners in Washington did it." This meant that the supposed plan was a bureaucratic clusterfuck, full of noise and fury, signifying nothing. Kat kept talking. "King and Bernadette are supposed to get me to the facility. And Bernadette is an explosives expert. She'll handle the detonation." I stood staring at her, completely dumbfounded. How could she be so stupid? There was absolutely nothing realistic about this plan. Kat apologized, her huge blue eyes filled with tears. "Honestly, what did I have to live for? You were dead. Okay, I get the situation." A bureaucrat whose ass would never be in danger came up with a plan to thwart the Nazi nuclear threat. Kat was probably the only person under 70 who had the knowledge to defuse those bombs and the youthful stamina to get to them. So the OSS forced her to volunteer, appealing to her overdeveloped sense of patriotism. Thus, the pathetic fact was that my beloved wife had to play the role of Nathan Hale because some basement monkey at Langley had a crazy brain overload. The inconvenient truth that this dear woman was going to die in the process didn't bother, because people who plan such things have no soul. And as we also know, that the end justifies the means. One horrible thought kept flashing through my mind like a bad neon sign. Oh my God, I'm about to lose her again. This was absolutely not an option, so I had to find a better option. Of course, there were a few minor difficulties, like the fact that I wasn't supposed to know about the mission, and the fact that I was dead. However, it was wartime, and we were at the very end of the command chain tree, so I was confident that I could cut in at the execution stage. The other 2 were obviously partisans used to improvising, especially if someone had a better idea.
I said, I want to meet your team members because I have an idea that will work better. Kat warily replied, they're isolated in a neighboring house while we complete operational planning. I raised an eyebrow and asked, in the next room? She threw me a, really? Look and muttered, this is the most secure place in the US, except for Los Alamos. Kat didn't need to explain this to me. Los Alamos was where the enriched uranium that Oak Ridge was producing was being assembled into a real bomb. Of course, it was safe. Suffice it to say, the thought of my wife being killed again was simply unacceptable, so I needed to induce her and her 2 companions to do what I wanted to do as soon as possible. I said impatiently, can we meet? Kat looked wary. I'd probably be wary too. Her dead husband showed up out of the blue and immediately tried to get involved in a top-secret classified mission. She undoubtedly understood why I wanted to do it. I just couldn't lose her again. Still, to agree to such a ridiculous proposition, she would have had to disbelieve me intensely and trust me to the bone. I said, look, I understand. I really do. This is a very important mission, and I'm basically a stranger to you. Plus, there's a million holes in my story. So I may be a German spy playing a trick on you. But you must feel the same way I do, right? She nodded her beautiful head uncertainly, tears in her beautiful blue eyes, and then the dam broke. She threw herself into my arms, our lips meeting, and lightning raced across the space-time continuum. Kat kissed me frantically, desperately. It spoke volumes about how upset she was by my death. I could feel the contained frustration she had experienced from years of love deprivation. I knew it because I'd been through the same thing myself. There simply wasn't another Kat in my world. So moments with other women were nothing more than a biological necessity, not loving nurturing. My wife had a bedroom, and we both knew we would end up in it. I lifted her up and laid her gently on top of the neatly spread covers. I was vaguely aware that it was the same bed on which she had entertained deep shit last night, but the difference lay in the circumstances. Our need for each other was all-consuming. It was like comparing a hurricane to a light summer breeze. The whole time we made it from the living room to the bedroom, Kat never once let go of my neck. She was still kissing me frantically. Then she lay back and looked at me, receptive and ready. Her body was as perfect as I remembered. Long, slender legs, wide hips, narrow waist, deep chest. She said with anguish in her voice, no foreplay. I am much larger and heavier than my wife, so I have always been careful not to crush her. However, this time she was in no mood to be careful. At that moment, she gasped for breath and began to shudder. I'd done this with Kat countless times, so I knew that her sudden burst of emotion wasn't my doing. It was an indication of what this strange new situation meant to her. I looked into that beautiful face, and it was completely open to me. Clearly, this was a profound moment for my wife. We then immersed ourselves in the familiar rhythms of love that had been established over all our years together. This aspect had not changed in the slightest. At the same time, she told me how much she missed me and how good it felt. Kat's usual bursts of emotion are events most women would remember for a lifetime, but I sensed that she was working on herself, preparing for something even more startling. It was a strange combination of debauchery and loss. It was the beginning of a climax like I had never seen before. I remember thinking that if there was someone nearby, they would have heard, but I didn't care. In a way, it was the most sensual thing I'd ever experienced. When it happened, Kat just collapsed on my chest, as if she'd died. Her arms fell around my neck, and I could see her tear-stained face for the first time. I understood those tears. I felt the same sense of wonder. By an incredible stroke of fate, our eternal gloomy despair had been transformed into something unique and special. I brushed away every tear as realization returned to her, and said one word with all my heart, forever. She looked at me with impassioned love and complete companionship and said, forever.
Welcome once again, my avid listeners, to the thrilling saga unfolding in our mystery story, which is as already released exclusively with us on Patreon, uncensored. Link to it in the description. The plot thickens as our protagonist, Eric, faces the harsh reality of his wife Kat's involvement in a dangerous mission to thwart the Nazis and their deadly nuclear plans. The intricate dance between dimensions and the fates of our heroes resembles a complex puzzle whose pieces fall into place one by one. In this dramatic turn of events, Eric discovers that Kat, his long-lost wife, is on a mission to destroy the Nazis' nuclear capabilities. Eric struggles to cope with this news, realizing that he can't bear to lose Kat again. Tension builds as the truth about the mission is revealed, and Eric is determined to change the course of events for the woman he loves. The emotional roller coaster continues as Eric and Kat find solace and connection in a passionate reunion. Intimate scenes serve as a poignant reminder of the depth of their love that transcends the boundaries of time and space. However, beneath the surface of desire lies the looming danger of Kat's mission, a risky journey that could change the course of history. As we navigate the complexities of love, loss, and wartime espionage, a new layer of mystery is revealed. Eric, armed with knowledge of both worlds, now seeks to change the course of the mission and rescue Kat from the clutches of danger. The stakes are high, and the narrative pulses with Eric's desire to rewrite fate. But will his plan succeed? Will Eric succeed in changing the course of the mission and securing a future with Kat? The answers to these questions are hidden in the mysterious web of our story, inviting you, dear readers, to embark on this journey full of intrigue, passion, and fear. Join me in the next installment as we delve deeper into the maze of parallel universes and witness the unfolding of a story that transcends time itself. And remember, the uncensored sequel is already waiting for you on our Patreon, where the plot twists are even stronger. Until next time, stay curious and continue to unravel the secrets of our fascinating narrative.